We are lighting the candle yet again. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with my partner in, not in crime, let's just say partner in knocking the world alive. That would be the one and only Jan Jeremias, who I just dearly love, looking forward to chatting with, and bringing a few people in to listen while we're going along. Maybe give us some ideas to talk about as well. So, Jan, anything you want to say to kind of like open up the space here and give us a little bit of a playground to work in?
Well, I mean, this isn't what we were chatting about when we were just chatting, Bill, but I listened to, I was listening to a podcast with Krista Tippett and this woman, Adrienne Marie Brown. And in it, she talks about, looking at nature and seeing in nature, basically getting answers from nature and looking to nature as an example.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she was talking about was this whole aspect of, nature never questions actually what it is in a way. Like, a tree is very happy being a tree and doesn't not really desire or think that it needs to be a daffodil. And then goes on to talk about basically, the function of nature and the ability of nature. And part of what she said, really, a lot of what she said really resonated with me. And I'd highly recommend to everybody to go back and listen to the podcast that she did. But this whole idea of, can we realize and celebrate? It's not only realize, celebrate each person as an individual, realizing that they have a unique contribution that they're supposed to make to the world. And in doing so, allow people to be who they are. And, I've been focusing and thinking about that a lot as I work with clients and people of different ages. And people share with me stories of even of concern about family members, and just, realizing that, like one of my clients is sharing that she's very concerned about one of her grandchildren, kind of thing, and sort of like the path he's taking or whatever. And I think that when you're a parent or grandparent, that does kick in, but also stepping back and realizing that each person has their own path. And then I can share a reading with everybody later on, just because I think it sums up something really beautiful and kind of to that point, or that kind of, to that point of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would encourage you to hang in there and keep going with it for a little while. I think there's a lot of gold in the whole notion, that though we may be saying the same words, we almost never are saying the same thing. Then each person's contribution is personal, highly customized, and in order to really be in a place where you can recognize the value. And I saw this meme along these lines: the most respectful thing that you can do is to really listen to someone, you know, not for what you're expecting them to say, but for what really comes out of their mouth, and then give them your authentic, fully engaged reaction to what they said, as opposed to what's normally going on inside your head. But
Mhm.
and I like more along the lines of, what if the whole world is let's just say, like a symphony that's uncomposed until all of the pieces get together and start sharing with each other.
That's actually a really great image too, because I think we've all listened at one point or another, whether it be even background music to a movie, to a
Right.
symphony, or to a really great band that, where everything kind of comes together and creates a sound that's more full and vibrant.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of like a symphony organ orchestra, because you realize when you listen. I have a student whose son was a very, 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 you know, phenomenal musician, and was in, like, I think the Children's Orchestra of New Jersey. I mean, really top notch musician, and just went to see him perform a number of times with all these kids who are all basically, probably 10 and up,
Yes.
so very talented. And to realize the necessity of each instrument, like, and what it adds to the fullness of the experience or the sound. And if we could look at each person as being of value and not go, and try to get around, like, I want to say the labels or the assumptions that are out there. Part of it is in regard to trying to cultivate understanding and acceptance of, let's say, those with different views or those coming from a different place than I am.
Right.
And so I think that I've been really focused on the whole idea of realizing that each person that is here living, each being basically has a purpose and is of value in some way.
I apologize for the disrupting the flow. Um, Life occurs. I'm in the middle of setting up a group of users on a new telephone system. And of course, after telling me that everything was good to go, now they're calling back in the middle of our podcast asking questions about stuff. That's how life goes, right?
Of
And
course.
so, while part of me could listen to that, like, oh, this is an interruption and what a pain and all the rest of that. The other part of me listens to it like, no, this is exactly what happens. This is how things are supposed to go. It's never supposed to go according to the script. And it's kind of that way too, if we're genuinely going to honor points of view and give people an opening in our life, to express themselves. And I made a choice there on the fly, probably because of the conversation we're having, to interrupt what I was doing to take their call, as opposed to just letting it go to voicemail and then having them cool their jets for a while, not knowing when I'd call them back. So I think in the meantime, what I think I heard you say and taking away from it was that you're sharing that you're kind of in a space right now of more or less listening for different things, in and from people, um, but I'm hearing it like in a mindfulness way, like in a way that it'll be more than just sharing noises with each other and then we move on to the next thing. That there might be some things at this point in your life that hearing the unique contributions of other people might make a difference for right now. Am I close to hitting the mark there?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Bill. And maybe what you're reading is that's where I'm coming at in my life. Like, of really kind of reevaluating and looking at that which I really feel is what I want to say of value and importance, and that which that's and what I really firmly believe is a measure of my success.
Right.
And looking at those things, and really in a way, so much of it is simplifying. And I'm saying, like, simplifying, going back to what's important. And so for me to do that in my relationships with other people, I have to look beyond what's on the surface. I have to look deeper, in some ways. And to one is, I can't get hung up on the surface sort of outward appearance of anybody. Like, that's not obviously important at all anyway. But also, and sometimes in the way they act or speak on the surface, because I think especially right now when everybody is set is and everybody is stressed was the word I was looking for. um, Everyone is stressed, and people are may act out or express on the surface, and I think everybody is stressed and somewhat anxious and about many different things. People sometimes are a little volatile, and kind
Yeah.
of looking beyond that volatility to something that might be a deeper cause for them, or even asking them, okay, well, tell me what's really going on with you, because you haven't really been acting yourself, or it seems like something's there. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'm sorry, but that's what I was getting off of you. But is kind of asking those really, maybe thought provoking or questions that require an answer, or to get people to open up a little bit more. And
Yeah.
maybe in that opening up process, they actually realize how they are. They don't. Sometimes I don't even know that people realize how they're coming across. And then all of a sudden, when you ask them that, they're like, "Oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that," or "I didn't even realize that you noticed that," or "that was noticeable."
Yeah. And when you're considering, what I like about this is you're almost distancing yourself from being in a conversation with them, you know? It's like, how do you observe and participate at the same time,
Hmm.
you know? And I think that's um I, I think that is one of the challenges for us as human beings, that to be able to disassociate a response or some type of a feeling that we get, and step back as an observer. And there's this thing that we used to talk about back in the old days, when we were starting to acknowledge that the thoughts in your head are, they're really nothing more than just, an automatic thing that happens, like breathing in and breathing out 80,000 thoughts a day. So just to kind of get into how we normally would react or think about things, it's called a technique of listening to yourself listen, you know? And what are you bringing to the conversation that was already there, as if it is what's going on now? Like, for instance, you can stand in front of a large group of in an audience, and you can say, teenagers, about teenagers, right? And that's going to get you a laugh, because yeah, they're going to all have a preconceived notion, but none of them share the same experience. It's just a funny experience for them, for someone to call it up. And we do that on all kinds of subjects. I mean, it's part of our wiring in terms of survival technique. How do we, the fight or flight sort of thing that Freud always talked about. Quite frankly, when you can hear that there's something new that you're engaging, but you already have a belief about it, and the belief is there because it's invisible. You can't tell when you have a belief. It's just how things are. So when you have a how things are about something, then you have this opportunity to either engage from there or say, wait a minute, that's really not what's going on now. Let's get back into observer mode here for a moment. So you have to be awake. You have to be really thinking in terms of getting an outcome from it that's not predictable or usual, if you will.
And when you was talking about, that observer kind of mindset, and I think one of the first steps is realizing, if somebody is acting out, or if somebody is, ranting or whatever, then it's really not about you. So you do have to disconnect from that part of it. You have
Right.
to take yourself out of that equation, that this is really not about me. This is about something within them, something that happened to them, whatever it is. And you do have to almost like step back and take yourself in some ways out of the conversation or that part of the dialogue. And
Agreed.
and to me, that's the first step, because if you think it's about you, you're going to go on the defensive, or you're going to start to go down the path in your head of like, what did I do? um you know that whole, either, or anger possibly because they're lashing out at you, and then you realize that, oh, they're not lashing out at you, they're lashing out at life, or they're lashing out at what happened, or whatever is going on with them. And so I think you need to really disconnect and kind of disassociate from that. And then you can step back and become the observer part of it. And the one gift about being the observer is that usually that observer person, if it is at a high enough level, and I'm not saying, I think this takes practice like everything, is it's beyond beliefs a lot of the time if you can get there. is like if you can get to a point where it has nothing to do with what you believe or what has happened to you,
Right.
if you're truly present for them, then it's a little, then it's different.
Interesting. And here's the power question. What is the usefulness of this?
Well, first thing that comes to my mind is first things that automatically popped in for me was this aspect of people feeling acknowledged and heard. That's what automatically comes in for me. I think that most of the time people just really, really all they want. I, and that might be a belief on my part, but I really think that that's what people are looking for. I think people want a voice and they're not offered that opportunity very often,
Yep.
where they feel like what they say or who they are matters.
Yeah.
And I think I want to say, you matter.
Well, without stretching the point too much, would it be safe to say that still and again, this is like about you, that you being concerned as to whether or not they feel like they matter would it would in my listening it would point back to that this is a caring, sensitive place that you are, because you really don't know how it is for them until you point blank ask them, and they may or not even may or may not even have an answer for you, right?
Well, they might not have an answer for you. And maybe
Yeah.
it is for you to some extent, and the fact that you don't take it personally, or you feel like you've shown up for someone or you're there for someone, whether they're ready to be there, whether they're an equal participant or not.
Yep.
But there are people that it is going to make a difference, that are going to show up, who really are going to appreciate the fact that you've acknowledged them, that you really believe that they matter and they have value, um, in the world, that they are unique, authentic, and have a contribution to make. It was interesting because I was doing some nutrition scans at a healing center, and I met like four individuals on the same day. Some had kids, and one guy was young. So some had kids, I want to say, in their 20s. So graduated and working. And this other guy was probably fairly close, like maybe in his 30s. And so I was talking to them and, the fathers of these individuals, and then this guy. And, all in the, like I said, people in their 20s and 30s. And when we were talking about it, it was like this consensus that they all feel hopeless
Yep.
and that they feel very discouraged and hopeless. And I thought to myself, I've been thinking about it a lot because I remember that was totally different than what my mindset was when I was in my 20s and 30s. Like I thought everything was possible. And I had dreams, and even some came true, some didn't. So, like some were different than I thought, but I had dreams that I felt were achievable.
Yes.
And basically, these were instances of young people who feel very hopeless. And
Right.
that was really sad to me, really sad. And I thought, as I've spent over the last, like, let's say, month thinking about this, I've thought, how do we shift that? Like, how do we realize, like, how do we encourage people to realize that they matter, they have value here? How do we reframe this whole idea of success and values to get people back to like feeling that they're alive at this point in time, so they must have a purpose here, because I don't believe anything is, you know, created in vain, so to speak, without some, even if I don't understand the purpose, there is a purpose.
So
And I hope that's not too like too foo-foo and philosophical for you.
I wouldn't say that it's foo-foo and it is philosophical, absolutely. And there is a good strong sprinkling of belief that I'm hearing in there. It's coming from almost a certainty on your part, and blessedly so, that everybody has value, whether they get it or not. It's an intrinsic part of having won this race to be here in the first place. I can buy into that in a heartbeat. Okay. I don't know how we get the conversation shifted to that place where, you and I, we're in rarefied air. We are in the creme de la creme de la creme of all of the privileged human beings that have ever lived. There are kings and queens that would die to have our problems. Okay. And most people, um, saddens me to say, and when you said seeing somebody being, young people who are disappointed, or who are discouraged, or don't see the point of why they're here. I say most, not some. Most human beings, out of the 8 billion that are here, we're probably talking a few 100,000, maybe a few million, that really kind of get that we can have these conversations and are in these kinds of conversations. How does this conversation get spread further? How does it get introduced into the upbringing in families, into the cultures? And there are cultures, I'm going to grant right now, there's things that we could point to, especially, Aboriginal type situations on all continents, where there's been a tradition of passing, roles from men to sons, from women to daughters, and from fathers to daughters, etc. Their value in terms of the family, their value in terms of the culture and the community. And yet there are other places where, children are something to be used. They're a tool.
Their tool, yeah. I think I recently became like I'm affiliated with a group recently. Really about one is about slowing down, especially in a world that's moving so fast now. And that might be, you might, say technologically, but a lot of ways is moving very fast and is slowing down and really getting to a point of quiet. I think at least if it's not seconds in a day where you pause, because I think that's where the kind of connection and value and appreciation comes. Because I think when you're so busy and distracted, it doesn't enter. There's no space. It's kind
Yep.
of like you're moving too quickly to even see it. So I think you have to slow down. Yeah. And like I said, it could be, I was talking to a client about this on Monday. It could be, you know, one of my favorite things, and I think Ken Caputo shared, our friend Ken shared this, is that every time he goes to a meeting that's, like where he's traveling, let's say by car or whatever, he takes a few moments when he gets out of the car to like take a look around and see where he is and take in his environment and take a few breaths. And I think, we move from things so fast, like one thing to another so fast. I'm guilty of this where I overschedule myself so much I barely have any breathing room in between stuff.
Yeah.
And we don't have any opportunity or we don't have any space to do much besides for like what's on our to-do list.
Yep.
And, and life is happening, most of life is happening not on the to-do list, like
Yeah.
there's a t-shirt for you. Might have to write that one down, um, but I feel like that's the first step to me because we have to get people to slow down, and maybe that's getting people out in nature more. just, outside of technology,
Right.
electronics, where things are, you're not only you're bombarded visually, but like it's sensory bombardment.
Yep.
And so maybe that's what we do is we encourage people, and that's where we go, Bill.
Sensory bombardment. There's a listening bias on my part that the word bombardment isn't necessarily a good thing. It's
Mhm.
it's almost, to um, being at the mercy or being victimized by something that there's no way out of. You are going to be overwhelmed, by all of these sensory inputs. And
And to be honest, I think that that's what's happening now. I think there's never any downtime. People are so, and me included, so addicted
yeah,
to devices and notifications and everything on phones, on technology, that I was on with a friend of mine the other day. We were talking about growing up, that we both camped, like went camping as kids. My friend Mary Jane, who I do a lot of workshops with, and she's from Canada. And so we were talking about that. And I said, I remember we would, like, my dad would commute to and from the campground. I
right.
mean, we weren't talking luxury campers. Like, we were talking about, like, you know,
And
tents and, tent trailers where maybe we had a covering so we weren't sleeping outside, but, we had electricity, and the fact that we would all go get electric hookups. So we had lights, but there wasn't really anything else that you were going to bring with you. And our biggest thing was, I remember my mother would say at that time, so we're talking like the 70s, I guess, that one is there was no TV and no telephone because everybody had landlines. So that was the big deal. And we would be out and it would be quiet. My father would go to work from there. Like, if we went local, I mean, we would travel too, but like for like 3 weeks or a month, my father would go back and forth to Pratt at the time, and we would camp during the day, and he would come there, like he would go home. And and it was great. I mean, never felt like I was like deprived. My mother said to me like a few weeks ago, were you upset you didn't go to sleepaway camp? And I was like, absolutely not. I said, I never felt like I missed anything. I mean, it was just fantastic. I mean, we explored all day. We went fishing and swimming and was out in nature like all day. Like, we didn't feel like we missed anything. But there was this real element of quiet, of like real, like being with nature and being outside. And any bombardment that we had was, as far as like, being on the phone all the time or too much TV, kind of thing wasn't happening. And so I kind of feel like if we could get people to step back a little bit
right.
and get off of technology and maybe get outside a little bit more, that might be a mechanism by which people could slow down a little bit and take a few deep breaths and, connect, maybe to a part of themselves that's deeper than, like I'm talking about, like a deeper part of themselves.
Yeah. Well, I will say this about that. Have you ever tried to take an iPhone or an iPad away from an 11-year-old?
I think it depends on how much. Like, I have one of my students used to, her house was a cell free zone. Like, she had 2 kids, and she was like, all the friends knew that they had to put their cell phones in a basket by the door when they came over, and they could
Right.
pick it up when they were leaving. And if they were in that house, there was no cell phone usage. And that was just the rule. Now that's different because you're a grandparent, and I think I know what you're referring to. And it's not like you're the parent, so it's a little different. But yes, I have nephews and nieces, and so I get what you're saying.
But when the boys were younger, um, we used to put them in timeout, or we would tell them, what behaviors were not appropriate. and then they'd put themselves in timeout. Okay.
I love that. I was bad. I got to go into timeout.
Yeah.
There's that
How
image
many
of
minutes you going for, Lincoln? I'm going for 5. I mean, I literally had to break him one year when he was about 3.5 years old. He ranted and raved and cried, and he was here, by himself. And his mom and dad were off doing something. They were here, in Connecticut at the time, but they went away for a little while. And the agreement was, Lincoln, 5 minutes of quiet and timeout will get you released. An hour and 40 minutes, he'd be sitting out there going, Mom, this is Lincoln. I don't want to be in timeout. And it just went on and on and on until he finally got tired and he was quiet for 5 minutes. And I went out and I said, Lincoln, you're out of timeout now. I said, you know why? He might have been 4. He said, no. I said, you were quiet for 5 minutes. That's what I told you had to do. He goes, okay. When I said 5 minutes in the future, he listened. And he would sit there and he'd do his time with his nose poked into the corner, sitting on his little chair.
I remember my brother sending my niece to her bedroom in timeout and told her she had to sit on the bed because all the toys were like, it was night. It was like later in the day and like after dinner. And there were all these toys there and he didn't want her playing with the toys. Like he wanted it to be like a timeout. Like you have to sit and basically think about what you did or quiet down or calm down. And I remember her sitting there. She was probably about 3 years old and she was negotiating the whole time.
Right.
Like sitting there and saying, well, can I play with this? Can I play with this? Like going through everything in the room, kind of thing.
Yes.
And my sister-in-law was a legal librarian. So my brother's sitting there going, you're not your mom trying to get through a case, like you're not a lawyer. Kind of thing, and trying to negotiate here. Timeout means that you're sitting on your bed and you're not doing, you can't play with anything right now. You have to contemplate or think about why you did what you did or something like that. But it was so funny, like for 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it was, her negotiating. And it was like, oh my gosh. And she was very articulate. And so she had this amazing vocabulary. So it was like,
agreed. And I'll tell you what, that's a trait that I don't want to punish out of a kid. I want them to always be in a questioning frame of mind. I want them to know when it's time to call it a day, but at the same time, I want them to stand their ground, and be in a place where they're not offended, but they're learning while this is going on. So here's the neat part. Now that they're 11 and 13, we talk about them being turkey boys. I used to sing a song when they were acting out. He's a turkey boy, and we went through all levels of that, and to the point where it's a big laugh getter, whenever I do that now because they're so big. And now what it is guys, please stop kicking the back of my chair my seat while I'm driving here down the road in this convertible. Okay. Can you stop roughhousing just for a few minutes? Bam, 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 bam. All right, guys, half hour, no electronics when we get home. What? Oh, okay. That's not fair. Then 5 minutes later, bam, 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 bam. Okay. That's an hour. No electronics when we get home. Wait a minute. So they're good for another 5 minutes and then bam, 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 bam. And I said, okay, you get your electronics back noontime tomorrow. And so the fun part of it was we got home, they went and got their Oculus, their iPad, their iPhone, all that stuff and deposited on the table next to my recliner over here. That was it. And Lincoln was the negotiator. He was, Grandpa, can we get our stuff back maybe at 11:30 instead of noontime, And I said, no, it's going to be noontime tomorrow. That's when you're going to get your stuff back. And then he gets up in the morning. First thing he goes, how many hours till noontime?
I know, right?
So it was comical, really. And they were not Philadelphia lawyering me like they shouldn't be punished. No, they got that they should be punished. Now it was, how soon can we get this over? You know?
Right, right. And then it becomes almost funny, and they realize how funny it is. That's also
You,
when it
you
is
got
like
it.
when
Absolutely.
they start to negotiate and they realize, like, and you say, and you kind of look at them and they're like, they're like, no, and they start to giggle or they laugh when they're giggle when they're small and laugh when they're like, they know it's not going to work, but they
Yeah.
figure they'll try anyway. And so it really is funny. It's, I, and I love that story because I think it does become like that. And I think you asked the question of like, do you know, or made the comment of like, do you know how hard it is to take away an electronic device from an 11-year-old? And
Oh, yeah.
I think I mean, and I always clarify by the fact that I don't have kids, but I've been around hopefully enough children through the years that um, you know that it's I get it, but it's also like, you know, even with it's all about follow through, you know, following through on what you say with kids or
Yep.
with pets. I mean, you know, if I'm lax, Tonka's going to push, you know, is going to do what he wants. Yeah, and so consistency or just, you know, keeping to your word. Like if you say you're going to take it away, then don't take it back because, you know, obviously kids are smart and they realize what they can get away with and what they can't.
Yeah.
And so it's just following through on those, you know, on those situations.
Well, see, that's where kids have it all over their parents. And that's because the kids can be focused on pinging until their parents just become desensitized and don't follow through. And that's one of the biggest reasons that parents like to give kids electronics now. So, like, at least we know they're doing something, they're not getting into any trouble. However, how do we know? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that, well, we saw it in the, you know, in the 60s to 70s, and basically because parents were busy and exhausted and coming home from work. And it was like, well, go watch TV
Yep.
because this way we know where you are and we don't have to worry about you. And then all of a sudden it got to be, you know, larger electronics and games and whatever. And some of it was like, I remember coming home one day with my, you know, going to my brothers and my sister-in-law. They had three little children, and my sister-in-law worked full time and coming in after commuting. And, you know, the kids were crying and it was dinner time. And she, you know, my sister-in-law was exhausted and my brother wasn't home yet. And, and just, you know, it's like you just need a little, like we talk about quiet and space and a little me time, and sometimes that's so hard to get when when that's your life, when
Right.
you are, you know, you're trying to like literally kind of grasp at a few seconds here and a few seconds there, which is why I said maybe take a pause between meetings and take a few breaths, because I think sometimes, you know, people are overwhelmed and don't have much time.
Yeah. Again, you know, all this really cool stuff that I hear you talking about requires three things that I can point to immediately. First of all, some responsibility for how the situation's going to get away from you, with the bombarding, with the overscheduling, with the lack of attention to things that are probably in many cases create some of the upset and some of the you know, the breakdowns that occur in our lives. That if were managing them in a maintenance kind of a, you know, prevention mode, they wouldn't be all these things going on at the same time. So that's number one. Number two is being awake and aware while the circumstances are calling for you to remember what you said you would do and what you said would be important to you. And then the third one is to play and pay particular attention to yourself, your body, your need to have a timeout, your need to take a moment and just allow the space to get opened up a little bit, and then to have a um, what I would call a spiritually active practice that would allow you to get to a place where there's calm, and where you're starting to be able to be less at the mercy of what's going on and more in a mode of choice and choosing.
Hmm. No, I mean, you summed it up so beautifully. And I think that, yes, I think that there is that element, one, of responsibility. Uh, because otherwise, you use the word, I think, mercy, because otherwise you're at the mercy of whatever that circumstance or whatever is happening. And, I think of responsibility and choice. Like, you do have to make a choice in that responsibility that something isn't right, or you see something, or you're tired, let's say, of living the way you're living, or you're tired, or you don't want to, or you just don't want to be in that, let's say, space of hopelessness, like, or helplessness, like whatever, however you want to, like, whatever resonates with you, because I think both are valid and both happen. And you have to kind of say, okay, well, I don't like this. And then, like, you
Right.
start to, and what can you do? And whether if that's ask for help, and or ask somebody, because you are so stuck. Like, sometimes when we're so stuck, we don't see, and so we need somebody to talk to and
Yes.
help us find a solution. But sometimes we just have to sit there and say, I don't like feeling like this anymore.
Well, good on you because you're really pointing to what, and I say, if we could get off of the being okay with things until they're really bad, we could have a lot more, time in the excellence zone. The enemy of excellence is not when things are bad, it's when things are okay and not that bad. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to even say, like, I always laugh because I learned this with my parents a long time ago. My mom, like, I would call my parents and I would say, "Well, how are you?" And my mother would say, "We're managing." And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, okay, what does that mean, mom, exactly? Like, managing isn't like, doesn't sound good to me. It sounds like we're getting by, or like we're scraping our way through, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, can we get to a space? And I love what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. It's like, why do we have to, like, why can't we act before we get into that zone of total disheartenment or total,
No
disintegration?
other choice. You got to stand and deliver now, but there's your choices are limited. You
You have choices before. So it, how do you move out of that? But I think sometimes you do have to go to the place where you've hit what we might want to, you could label it as rock bottom, or whatever, however you want to call it. Um, a breakdown, total, rock bottom, where you're struggling basically. And why do we have to get to the point of struggle?
yeah.
Like, why can't we act before we go to that place of struggle? And
Well,
hopefully, but I think that, to be honest, I think that the majority of people don't act until something is pretty uncomfortable. Yeah, pretty uncomfortable. And that can be physically, is we learn and we numb. Some of that is society or whatever, that basically, that whole idea of suck it up. And in physical health, it's, the whole gaslighting kind of experience where, we kind of are told that, oh, that's just your imagination, or your age, which is now my biggest pet peeve. Like, I can't stand that expression. Like, what do you mean my age? I plan on living for another, God willing, how many years? Like, don't tell me that this is what it's supposed to be because of my age. Like, annoys me to no end. But,
but we've
so
had that conversation before. They're in the business of repair, not prevention. Okay,
prevention. So I
they
think
get paid if they're repairing.
so I so I think that, but I think that, can people start to maybe realize there's more than just getting by, and realize that, life can be, you can have a really great life with not a whole, with just looking at what you have. And I'm doing a workshop on in August, August 17th, I think it is, harvesting abundance, recognizing the riches within. And it's really about acknowledging, like, what's your idea of abundance? Like, okay, I have my idea of abundance, but really also recognizing about how much I already have. Like, what are the treasures that are already there that I already possess, whether that be
Yeah.
people, like, whatever you can label. And so is to get people to not settle for just getting by.
Yeah. And there's a potential pitfall there with people collapsing abundance, meaning that things are not that bad. Abundance is I have what I need for the moment. Um, it has nothing to do. Abundance is a mindset in which you look any direction and it all looks possible and doable. Abundance isn't about stuff or things; it's about the size of your mind, and what you feel your capacity and capabilities are. And the abundance mentality has everything to do with um, there are not finite amounts of things to be shared in the world, that you and I can generate whatever we need to satisfy everybody's situation, their wants and their needs. But fascinating conversation today. And even with our interruptions and everything, which were perfect and right on cue. And by the way, I was able to get the client back up and running and happy while we were continuing our conversation. So I just want to, in terms of like wrapping up, Jan, again, you put us on a really good course here today with a lovely, lovely chat, and I appreciate you. And anything you'd like to just kind of say to wrap up?
Well, I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll just close with the reading I had mentioned earlier.
Sure.
Um, so Adrienne Marie Brown, she says, my favorite life forms right now are dandelions and mushrooms. The resilience in these structures, which we think of as weeds and fungi, the incomprehensible scale, the clarity of identity excites me. I love to see the way mushrooms can take substances we think of as toxic and process them as food, or that dandelions spread not only themselves, but their community structure, manifesting their essential qualities, which include healing and detoxifying the human body, to proliferate and thrive in a new environment. The resilience of these life forms is that they evolve while maintaining core practices that ensure their survival. A mushroom is a toxin transformer. A dandelion is a community of healers waiting to spread. What are we as humans? What is our function in the universe?
What indeed? That's just lovely. I have nothing to add.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Again, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And that world is working, whether you think so or not. It is unfolding as it should, to borrow a phrase from Desiderata. And quite frankly, your job out there is to dance with it. Your job is not to fight and resist and make yourself old and tired. And no matter how old you get, never buy that that's the reason why you feel the way you do. Always, always, always press for the best.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Ann.
Thank you, Bill. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye for now, and everybody stay well.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.